This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
Good evening. My name is Jacinta Thompson and I'm the Executive Director and Events and Exhibitions Producer of the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the land we meet on today is Kaurna land, and we wish to express our respect for the Kaurna people, their elders and ancestors, and acknowledge the spiritual and cultural relationship they have with their traditional land. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight on behalf of the Hawke Centre and the University of South Australia for our presentation with Professor Sandra Thom-Jones as she discusses her new book, Growing into Autism. Sandra is a passionate advocate for the inclusion of autistic people in all aspects of society, and I'm really thrilled that you're joining us tonight, Sandra, so a warm welcome to Adelaide. Thank you. Following Sandra's presentation, she will be joined on stage by Professor Susan Hillier, Dean of Research, Allied Health and Human Performance here at UniSA. Welcome, Susan. I would also like to thank Melbourne University Publishing for providing the platform for many diverse writers and thinkers. The Hawke Centre is committed to delivering a varied program of events and exhibitions throughout the year, which reflect our fundamental themes of strengthening our democracy, valuing our diversity, and building our future. The session tonight is being recorded, and a video will be available on the Hawke Centre website next week. Can I encourage you to bring this to the attention of friends and colleagues who could not join us tonight? As we are filming, can I please ask that you switch your phones to silent? I would also like to mention that when at times when we want to clap, can I ask that you clap in this way? Okay, if you would please do that, that will be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Professor Sandra Thom-Jones is the Pro Vice-Chancellor, Research Impact at the Australian Catholic University. Sandra also leads the Autism at ACU research program. Sandra has undertaken numerous research projects on the experiences of autistic people and the knowledge and attitudes towards autism in the community. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sandra Thom-Jones. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, and apologies for the sudden change to the clapping style. You'll get used to it. So welcome everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. Gosh, there's a lot of you. I want to particularly thank the autistic people in the audience for your attendance. I know that it's loud and busy and overwhelming, and many of you would prefer to be home in your PJs, which is about how I feel right at this second. It really means a lot to me that you're here. Please feel free to do whatever it is you need to do to feel comfortable. Wear your face mask, maintain social distancing, particularly if you're concerned about COVID. Wear sunglasses if these lights are bothering you. Wear earplugs or headphones, move or stim if you need to. And if you need a break, I promise not to be offended if you duck out for a few minutes. And I promise that I won't do that. Now let's talk about growing into autism. The first question that a lot of people ask me is, why did I call my book Growing into Autism? There are two parts to that answer. The first is that it is a literal description of what happened to me as I came to understand and accept my autism diagnosis. The second is that it is a response to one of the most harmful myths about autism, the myth that children grow out of autism. One of the most common and most misleading statistics you will see about autism is that it is most prevalent among children aged 5 to 14 years. But what does that statistic actually mean? When the Australian Bureau of Statistics reports autism prevalence, what they are reporting is not the number of people who are autistic, but rather the number of people who are diagnosed as autistic and report this diagnosis when filling out the ABS survey. Very young children don't appear in these statistics solely because they haven't been diagnosed yet, which is why there's not many people at that end of the graph. There are many reasons why autistic adults are not counted in these numbers, and so there's not many people at that end of the graph. Many, like me, would not have been diagnosed when they were children because autism would not have been considered as an explanation for their challenges. Autism has only been formally recognised as a discrete diagnosis since 1980. So think about that, that's not very long. In Australia, Medicare only covers diagnostic services up to the age of 13 years. So many adults, even once they realise that perhaps autism might explain the reason that they are not quite fitting in, can't actually afford the hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars it's going to cost them for a private diagnosis. Autism is a lifelong condition. An autistic child will grow up to be an autistic adult. You might hear people say that they've seen lots of autistic children, but they've met very few autistic adults. So some children must grow out of autism. This is another myth, and one that hides a very disturbing truth about the word that faces autistic people. The reality is that many autistic children and their families face ongoing pressure to fit into a world that wasn't made for us. So we tend to do one of two things. Many of us learn from a very young age that the world outside our front door is an unsafe place. We avoid public places where we will attract the stares of strangers for our repetitive body movements or noises that we make. Where we'll avoid the dismissive comments when we can't explain what we're feeling in words. So we stay home and you don't see us as autistic adults. Others of us learn that we can gain the acceptance of other people in our society by hiding who we are. We learn to talk and to move and to behave like non-autistic people. We seem to have grown out of our autism, but beneath the surface is the sheer exhaustion that comes from spending every minute of every day trying to hide our real selves from the world so that we won't make other people feel uncomfortable. If you've read the cliff notes on my book, you'll know that it starts with a crisis. There I was with this ostensibly successful life, a great career, a beautiful home, caring husband, who's in the front there, 2 loving sons, and very supportive friends. By all the standard external measures, I was successful. But in reality, I was constantly overwhelmed and exhausted. I was certain that I was missing out on something significant. And even though I had no idea what it was that I was missing, its absence made me so anxious that some days I felt like I couldn't breathe. For a long time, I thought that it was because I was getting older and that it was normal to worry about getting old and not having done things, even if I had no idea what the things were that I hadn't done. I had many, many long conversations with my husband about my anxiety about getting older, which is what I thought it was, and my desperate need to figure out what was missing from my life. The more we talked, the more I realised that what was missing wasn't something external. It wasn't a thing I needed to own, or a place I needed to go, or a goal I needed to achieve. What was missing from my life was me. I didn't know who I was, or what I wanted, or what made me happy. I had put so much energy into being all the things I was meant to be: a good daughter, a good student, employee, friend, wife, mother, neighbour, colleague, boss, that I had lost all sense of who I actually was underneath the me that I worked so hard to be in order to meet other people's expectations. So how did I get to that point? I had always felt that I didn't quite fit in the world. From the time I was a small child, I thought I was just a fundamentally inadequate human being. The way that I thought, the way that I spoke, the way that I moved, the very way that I existed just wasn't quite right. I learned from a very young age that being different was not a good thing to be. It meant that you were excluded from groups, which in itself wasn't too bad because I was generally quite happy on my own, but it also made you a target. Made you a target of bullies, made you a target of ridicule, and it made you feel like you really just didn't belong. As I progressed through adolescence and into adulthood, I became extremely proficient at hiding all the things that made me different from other people. I learned how to speak like them, how to move like them, how to act and react like them. I completed several university degrees, climbed the career ladder, and built a successful life. But I was constantly, permanently anxious and exhausted. The funny thing is, I thought that everyone experienced the world the same way that I did. I thought that everyone found the lights in the office so bright that they had a headache by lunchtime. I thought that everyone struggled to separate the voice of the person they were talking to from all the other sounds in the environment. I thought that everyone found social rules confusing and had to learn the scripts for every interaction they took part in. I thought the only difference between me and all those other people was that they managed it better than I did. So I just had to try harder. When I became a mum, I had 2 perfect children. They just happened to be autistic. And it very, very slowly began to dawn on me that maybe my differences weren't character flaws. There were so many things about my sons that teachers and experts saw as problems to be addressed, that I saw as normal ways of thinking, acting, and being in the world. My kids were just like me. But I didn't think that they were flawed or damaged or faulty. And it was actually my oldest son who finally persuaded me to go through the process of obtaining a formal diagnosis. And when I was finally formally diagnosed, it was a huge relief. I joined all the online groups and I read everything I could find on autism in women. I'd read everything that I could find on autism in boys in the decades before, after my kids were diagnosed. I read lots of memoirs, which were really insightful and engaging, but left me with lots of why and how questions. As an autism researcher working in a university, I read lots of academic journal articles, which provided detailed scientific information, but didn't connect to my lived experience. And I often read scientific articles that conclusively proved things that I thought, that can't be right, which most autistic people reading scientific journal articles will have experienced. I wanted a book that explained different aspects of what it's like to be autistic, explaining the characteristics referred to in the literature, but in a way that was more human and made sense to me as an autistic person. And then one day, my son's psychologist said to me, "Well, you should write one." And here we are. So, a few things about the process of writing my book. Now, deciding on the structure of the book was the hardest part for me. And I must have changed my mind dozens of times about the right structure. I wanted the information to be easy to find and accessible to people with different levels of knowledge and experience of autism. I wanted people to be able to pick the bits that they wanted to read that were relevant to them at the time, not have to read all the stuff that they didn't want. And working out the order and structure was a lot more complex than I anticipated. And after a lot of thought and deliberation, I finally settled on using the 3 categories of the diagnostic framework as a broad categorisation. And I was really concerned about doing it this way because I didn't want to pathologise autism. I didn't want to support a medical model that reduces autistic people to a series of symptoms, because we are so much more than that. However, what I thought was, for many people, particularly people who've been newly diagnosed, or parents of people who are newly diagnosed, and seeking to understand what it actually means to be autistic, this framework is probably where they start from. Because you walk out of a diagnostician with these categories and that framework. That's what you've been told. So I wanted my book to be able to explain, okay, this is what you've been told by the psychologist or the psychiatrist or whoever's diagnosed you, but this is what it actually means from the inside as an autistic person. So that's what I tried to do, and I hope that's what I've succeeded in doing. One of the other things that was really hard writing the book, and it's one of the hardest things for most late diagnosed autistic people, is reflecting back on my experiences as a child, an adolescent, a young adult, and a somewhat older adult, and realising how much different my life would have been if I'd been diagnosed earlier. I think I would have been much kinder to myself if I'd understood that many of my differences and challenges were due to my neurotype and not due to some fundamental character flaw, or to not trying hard enough or being good enough. There were definitely moments when I found myself thinking, if only I'd known I was autistic then. And I often imagine how much different my life would have been if I'd been able to understand and articulate what I needed at times in my life when I was having challenges. There are a number of reasons why it is harder for women and girls to get diagnosed. Firstly, the diagnostic criteria are largely based on the way that autism is expressed in males, because most of the research into autism has been undertaken with males. This means that many autistic women and girls won't appear to meet the diagnostic criteria, despite being autistic, and is why it's essential that more psychologists and psychiatrists are trained in recognising and working with autistic females. Secondly, the stereotypes that people have of autism, often influenced by media portrayals, mean that we expect autism to look a certain way. And as autistic people in the audience will attest, we've all heard the phrase, "But you can't be autistic because I have an autistic son or nephew or neighbour and you're nothing like him." Third, girls and women have been found to be better at masking their autistic characteristics. That is, hiding the aspects of themselves that are different to others, which reduces the likelihood that their autism will be diagnosed. But masking also has a considerable negative impact on our mental and physical health. My relationship with masking has changed fundamentally since my diagnosis, although I would have to say that it's still evolving, and writing this book has been a huge part of that process. Like so many autistic people, I have been masking my entire life. Obviously, for most of my life, I didn't call it that because I had no idea that's what it was. I thought that's what everybody did, or at least everybody who, like me, didn't seamlessly move through life getting everything right. I thought everyone came home at the end of the day completely exhausted and unable to function. I thought everyone found social interaction confusing and draining. Like many autistic people, there were multiple versions of me. The work me was very professional, serious, driven, and apparently socially competent. The social me, albeit predominantly social in online groups that didn't involve face-to-face contact, was obsessed with doll collecting, knitting, country music, and living in a world where everything was pink. The at-home with my family me was somewhere in between the two of these, but still felt the need to keep certain aspects of herself hidden, even from her closest family members, in case they realised just how damaged she was. The alone in my room by myself me sang and stomped and twirled and stimmed and talked to herself in funny voices. And my book, the process of writing my book, has really helped me bring all of those different me's into the one person. And I'm slowly learning to actually like that person. For a long time, I didn't think I needed a formal diagnosis because I was at a stage in my life where I assumed it wouldn't make much difference. My main reason for seeking a formal diagnosis when I did was that I felt it would enable me to be a more effective autism advocate. I was anxious about the diagnostic process. I wasn't worried about the possibility that I would be diagnosed as autistic because by that stage I had self-identified that way for some time and I was comfortable with it. I was worried that I would be diagnosed not autistic. What if the outcome was that autism wasn't the explanation for my differences and challenges and I was just a flawed neurotypical person? I wasn't prepared for the emotional effect the diagnosis would have on me. It was an absolute life changer and the beginning of a journey into being comfortable with myself as a human being. Here was official confirmation that the challenges and problems I experienced weren't a matter of not trying hard enough or not being good enough. I was different, not broken. My diagnosis gave me the courage to stand up and advocate both for myself as an individual and more broadly for autistic people around me. And slowly, progressively, that gave me the confidence to begin taking my mask off. This was a gradual process, tiny steps at a time, each one anxiously anticipating how people may react. Little changes have made a huge difference to my energy and confidence levels, like being able to tell people that I need to have my camera off in Zoom meetings in order to be able to process what they're saying, or explaining to my boss that I would be more productive if I can work from home, or wearing my sunglasses when I meet with colleagues in the far too bright cafeteria at work. Hopefully, those changes have also made it a little bit easier and a little bit safer for my autistic colleagues and students to take the same steps to make their day at work or study a little bit less exhausting. I would love to say that I bravely take off my mask at all times in all situations, but I'm not quite there yet. I'm going to digress here and talk a little bit about language. You'll probably have noticed that throughout this speech, and whenever I talk about autism, I use person-first language. I don't describe myself as a person with autism. I describe myself as an autistic person. Why is that? Like many autistic people, I see my autism as part of who I am. It's not something I pick up and put down like a hat, and it's not something I'm embarrassed about, like a pimple. Don't look too closely, because I do have one at the moment. Let's compare being autistic to another stigmatised and widely misunderstood condition, being South Australian. Now, I'm making a few assumptions here. First, I'm assuming that many of the people in this room are actually South Australian. Second, I'm assuming that most of you are comfortable with being South Australian. You don't secretly dream of waking up in the morning and finding that you're a Victorian. Third, I'm assuming that you see being South Australian as an intrinsic part of your identity. It influences the way that you think, feel, and act in your everyday life. So how would you feel if people constantly referred to your community as if it was something separate to you, or something that you picked up and put down? Kelly has South Australianism, or Kelly lives with South Australianism. Now imagine how you would feel if people referred to this integral part of your identity as a burden you carried. Kelly suffers from South Australianism. That's the way many autistic people feel when people refer to our autism, which is an absolutely fundamental and inseparable part of who we are, as something we should seek to distance ourselves from. I do a lot of research into the representation of autism in the news and entertainment media, because there's considerable evidence that this is where many non-autistic people get their knowledge about autism. There has definitely been an increase in positive stories about autism in the news media in recent years, and it's great to see more stories about autistic people participating in the community and achieving success in education and employment. But it is important to think about how these stories are often framed. Again, I'm going to ask you to think about autism in the same way as our other stigmatised condition. Imagine you picked up the newspaper and you constantly read headlines like these. Local man makes major contribution to the community despite his South Australianism. Young woman overcomes her South Australianism and becomes a successful lawyer. Imagine that a fundamental part of your identity was regularly portrayed in the media in terms of a challenge you needed to overcome in order to be successful or to be valued by our community. This is the way many autistic people feel when they read stories of their achievements that are framed in being in spite of their being autistic. Where are the stories about the things that our community have achieved because we are autistic? Autistic people do have many strengths. While every autistic person is different, just as every non-autistic person is different, some of our common strengths include we tend to have a strong moral compass. Many autistic people are known for their honesty and integrity, reliability, and commitment to social justice. We tend to have a strong commitment to getting things right. We're detail-orientated, we persevere, and we're perfectionists. We value knowledge and learning. Many autistic people are highly intelligent, have advanced reading skills, excellent memories, and great depth of knowledge on their topics of interest. They may not be your topics of interest, but they know a lot about the things that they are experts in. We care about people. Autistic people tend to accept others just as they are. We don't bully other people, we don't have hidden agendas, we're trusting and we're trustworthy. That's why I'm so passionate about the changes we have about changing the conversations we have about autism, particularly in the media and on social media. We see too many stories about autistic people as a burden, stories that focus solely on our challenges. When we see stories about our strengths, they focus on savant skills, which only a proportion of autistic people have, or they talk about us overcoming our autism to achieve success. They rarely present us as whole people, a combination of our strengths and challenges, but worthy of acceptance and support, just as we are. I, for one, did not overcome my autism. Many of the things I have achieved in my life are because of, not in spite of my autism. I'm a successful researcher because, like many autistic people, I commit myself with absolute passion to topics of interest, wanting to learn every aspect of the topic, and with an ability to focus my attention for extended periods of time. I'm a prolific publisher of journal articles because, like many autistic people, I'm thorough and concise and pay attention to every tiny detail of the work that I'm doing. I have a terrific relationship with my staff because, like many autistic people, I'm genuinely committed to equality and equity and helping other people to achieve. However, I'm not Superwoman. It's easy for people to look at that aspect of my life and assume that I do not experience any challenges living in a world that was not built for autistic people. First, I need to acknowledge the many things that I cannot do or struggle to do that other people may take for granted. I cannot drive a car. Technically, I can drive, and I do have a driver's licence, but my history of wrecked cars and hospital visits are testament to my inability to coordinate the many different inputs that are required to safely navigate traffic. To watch what the other cars are doing and remember what my hands are doing and my feet are doing, I can't coordinate all of those things at the same time. I eat the same dinner every single night. That's it up on the screen for those who are interested. It's about $6, comes in a little plastic tub. Takes you a whole 3 minutes to prepare. Okay. Partly because of the comfort and predictability of knowing what my dinner will taste like actually helps me navigate through my complex day, because there's something I'm absolutely certain what it's going to be like at the end of the day. And partly because I have not mastered meal preparation beyond pressing buttons on a microwave. This is the extent of my cooking skills. Even then, my husband generally gets the soup out of the microwave so that I don't burn myself. And I wear an apron when I'm eating to catch the soup that I wouldn't inevitably spill on myself. I cannot do the grocery shopping because the bright lights, the piped music, the cold freezer section, and the crowds of people combine to make an overwhelming sensory experience that makes me forget what it was that I needed to buy. My challenges with understanding non-verbal and social cues mean that I am constantly worried that I will say or do something that offends or irritates other people, or that I will misinterpret their actions or intentions. A lot of things that come naturally to non-autistic people take conscious effort and energy for autistic people, including social interaction. That doesn't mean that I don't like people or that I don't like spending time with them, just that it takes a lot of energy. And the more I have to mask my autistic characteristics, the more energy it takes. I'm definitely not Superwoman. That leads me to the second important caveat on my apparent achievements. I need to acknowledge the trade-offs that I make each day and over a lifetime in order to achieve success in my career. For decades, I carefully put on my neurotypical mask each weekday morning and maintained it for the 8 hours a day that I was at work, or longer if there were breakfast meetings or after-work functions. At the end of each workday, I came home, put on my pyjamas and curled up on the couch. If I have had a week with lots of in-person activities and overwhelming sensory input, I will spend my evenings and weekends in my room with my weighted blanket, the lights dimmed, and the volume on the television barely audible. If I have a week with lots of online meetings, I will spend my weekend in silence, not having the social energy to interact with my friends and family, even for a brief phone call. I am absolutely delighted to be here with you tonight to talk about my book, and I'm having the most wonderful time, but I'm planning to spend the next few days in silence with my cat and my jigsaw puzzle. So, what do I hope you'll take away from my book? If you're an autistic reader, I hope it helps you to understand your unique strengths and support needs as an autistic person, recognising that no two autistic people are the same, so there will be parts of the book that resonate and parts that don't. I hope it helps you to communicate your needs to the people around you and to advocate for the things you need to live your life. If you are a non-autistic reader, I hope it gives you some insight into what it is like to be an autistic person. I hope it encourages you to recognise the value in neurodiversity, to reach out to the autistic people in your life to find out how they would like to be supported, and to help them create a more inclusive world. Most of all, I hope this book goes some way to addressing the harmful myth that children grow out of autism and replaces it with the knowledge that, with the right supports, they can grow into autism. Instead of a world that sees autistic people through the lens of our challenges and aims to fix us so we fit in, I wish for a world that sees our strengths and values the meaningful contributions we have made through history and will continue to make. So how can we support people to grow into their autism? There are many things we can do, but here are 3 that I have found particularly helpful. We can understand that autistic people may have different communication styles and body language. Many autistic people use repetitive behaviours or body movements, like rocking, tapping or pacing, to help them focus and regulate their emotions. They may find eye contact difficult, process information differently, or have unusual speech patterns. Accepting these differences, rather than trying to fix them, helps us to feel comfortable in our own skin. We can try to make the environment less hostile. Bright lights, loud noises, and strong smells can be overwhelming for autistic people. Dimmer switches, quiet shopping times, and other environmental changes can make us feel more welcome in the world. When these changes can't be made, accepting the use of sensory aids like headphones, sunglasses, and sensory-friendly clothing can make it easier for us to participate in the community. We can recognise and nurture the many strengths of autistic people. Yes, there are challenges that come with being autistic, but we are so much more than those challenges. Commonly noted autistic strengths include honesty, consistency, focus, attention to detail, loyalty. Helping us to recognise and build on our strengths can be the key to helping us accept and value ourselves as autistic people. These are just a few suggestions. Let's keep the conversation going on how we can support autistic people to grow into rather than out of their autism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I don't even need to look at the audience to know that that was an amazing talk and that you've already benefited from hearing from Sandra. Exactly. And I also, if you haven't had a chance to read the book, I thoroughly recommend it. I have to confess, I don't often read non-fiction, and it is not fiction. It is really a riveting book. I've worked a lot with people my whole career who are not neurotypical, and I learnt so much. So I really do recommend that you read it. And I think particularly because it is written in such an honest and embodied way, if I may say that. And I think even when you read the titles, you take some of the sort of diagnostic terms and you actually explain to us what that feels like from the inside, which is an amazing insight and a great gift that you've given us. So my first question actually is about your last slide, and it's something that's interested me watching my boys grow up and go through the school system. I often found myself saying to teachers, this is a very round hole, this school, and I think my boys are a little bit square. Don't tell my sons that I said that. And it felt to me like the holes were getting rounder and there were a lot of square kids. Do you feel like that's something that's happening, that we are expecting more and more homogeneity?
I think in our schools and in so many aspects of society, I know when I look back at when I was at school, there was very much a sense that being different was wrong. You needed to be the same as everyone else. But that probably came more from the other students. I felt a little more acceptance amongst teachers that students could be a little bit different. I know when my boys were going through school, there was a much stronger sense that, this is the curriculum, this is the way that we learn, we all behave in these ways, we all act in these ways, we all learn in these ways. And I see that in the workplace, I see that in the way that we interact with each other, bringing up to autistic children. I know, shopping centres, all kinds of public places. There is this, we have a society that does seem to have a very narrow tolerance for behaviour, and we should all act the same, talk the same, behave the same, and workplaces are very much like that. One of my biggest challenges still to this day with workplaces is there are so many rules. I go into work in the morning and I say good morning to everyone because I know that's what I'm supposed to do. And then I think, I want to go and get some lunch. Do I have to say hello to everyone on the way out? Or if there's people that I didn't say good morning to in the morning? And so there's all those rules that people expect you to follow, and there are ways of behaving, and I think our school system and employment in some ways are getting more and more that way as we go along. And maybe that's because schools are busier and classroom sizes are getting larger, and there's so much more expectation. I had the joy of growing up when education was free. I know that's a scary thought, but you could make mistakes with your education. You could pick the wrong subject, you could goof off for a year, something could go wrong. I think there is so much pressure on schools now for children to all pass their NAPLAN and, get good marks and then all choose the right subjects. And so we're pressuring people to be more and more the same. I think there is, a narrowing tolerance for... We don't see that creativity. We don't sort of say, wow, this kid's really good at this thing or really interested in this thing. Let's build the curriculum around them. Let's develop their learning around that. We say, no, but this is what you have to learn.
Well, on that topic, I think you're aware that our Premier, Peter Malinauskas, has announced quite a few initiatives around autism, one of which is that every school will have, I've got it written here somewhere, some kind of... I've circled it here. They've called a dedicated autism inclusion teacher in every state primary school from 2023. So how do you think that will pan out? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it will work?
I'm provisionally excited for South Australians and at the same time provisionally anxious for South Australians. I think it's great to see that investment in schools and that commitment and the recognition that something needs to happen. The bit that I'm anxious about is the risk that schools might say, great, we've got an autism inclusion teacher, they can deal with the autistic kids. So to me, if the role of the autism inclusion teacher is to teach the autistic children, then we're taking a step backwards. If the role of the autism inclusion teacher is, let's make this school autism inclusive, let's teach all of the teachers how to support these kids, let's look at what environmental changes we need in the school to make the school autism friendly, let's build a culture and an environment that's supportive of these students, then it's fantastic.
So, great.
I'm guessing we've got a few parents in the audience.
Yeah. So another of the announcements was that there'd be some more $50 million to fund access to more specialists. So I'm taking up your point about that there's nothing wrong with you, that you don't need to be fixed. So how does that work, then, getting access to specialists like speech pathologists, psychologists? Because our uni has a bit of an interest in this because we train speech pathologists and psychologists.
There's a difference between saying that there's something wrong with me because I'm autistic and that needs to be fixed, and there are things that I can be supported with. So I think there are ways we can support autistic people where specialists come in very handy. So a lot of autistic people will have co-occurring conditions that may mean that things like support with speech or OT are very, very helpful in terms of being able to function better in the world. Personally, I regularly see a psychologist, and that is hugely helpful to me because I can say this because I'm guessing there's also some non-autistic people out there. You non-autistic people are really confusing to me. And if I didn't have my psychologist that I could go and talk to and say, hey, please explain all these weird people to me so I understand what's going on, I would find it very hard to cope in the world. So to me, providing OT, physio, speech, psychology is not about saying we're fixing this autistic person. It's saying what supports do we put in place around this person to help them cope and function at their best in a world that was not built for them. Physically and socially was not built for them.
Right, that's great advice. We had a lot of questions from the audience, so thank you very much. And when I read them, and Sandra read them too, we felt that a lot of them were covered in the talk, and I can tell you for sure they're definitely covered in the book. And I don't get royalties from the book, so me telling you to buy the book is very acceptable. I think it is good. But one question in particular, we also obviously teach teachers here, and one question came in: the more I study autism, the more I realise how little I know. How can someone truly become an expert in their chosen profession? In my case, that's teaching. I have 2 teaching degrees, a master's, and I attend lots of PD, but I still feel like a novice. So what advice would you give that teacher who's clearly on the journey of trying to understand what your experience is?
Talk to autistic people. Actually, my advice wouldn't be for that person. My advice would be for your university and all universities. What we need to do is we need to alter our university systems to make them more inclusive. So there are so many barriers to autistic people completing courses in teaching and allied health and health more generally. And I have this conversation a lot with people. I can assure you that most autistic people would love to have an autistic teacher at school. I would love to be able to see an autistic OT, speech therapist, physiotherapist, nurse, doctor. But we set up so many barriers to those people getting through university. If we actually made universities more inclusive and more supportive, and we looked at things like our outdated assessment criteria and the way that we force group work and the way that we communicate and the way we set up assignments, if we adjusted that, we supported autistic people to actually get through and train in those professions, then instead of your teacher having to do a PD course, they could be teaching in the classroom next to an autistic teacher and they could learn. And, I think we could change the world.
It's a great visual. You might want to get some photos of that. It's very good. It's very good. Yeah. Now, another interesting thing that's happening, because we've got a bad case of South Australianism here, and clearly Premier Malinowskis is deeply affected. He has also announced that we have, where have I written this? This was news to me as well, that we've got, I did know we've got a minister dedicated to representing people with autism, so that's, I think, that speaks to what you've just said. And that there's going to be a new state autism strategy that will operate, and all government agencies will be required to sign up, and it will be an autism-friendly charter. What would that charter have in it, ideally, from your point of view?
Ideally, the charter would start by talking to autistic people, and if we're serious about government agencies creating autistic-friendly organisations, then they should have autistic people advising on that. Too often what we do is we see people who are experts say, we're going to create an autism-friendly school, government organisation, company, whatever, so we'll get in the experts, we'll read a few books, and we won't talk to autistic people. If we're really making them autism friendly, we talk to autistic people, we look at, well, do we have autistic people working in these organisations, leading these organisations, advising and informing these organisations? To me, those things should be in your charter.
Yeah, okay. And I'm going to jump a little bit now. A lot of the questions are about should I pursue a diagnosis for my child? How can I help my child? What can I say to the teachers and so forth? I think the thing that came across really clearly in your book was that you found the diagnosis somewhat liberating, well, actually a relief. So I guess that kind of answers that question about should I get my child diagnosed. Is there a situation where sometimes the diagnosis doesn't work for you, where you might say to the parents, no, don't?
I would honestly really struggle to think of a situation where I would advise someone against going for a diagnosis. One of the things people say to me a lot is, I'm worried about getting a diagnosis because I don't want my child to have a label. You've only got to spend 10 minutes in a playground to know that all children have labels. And I've been called so many things in my life, not just as a child, as an adult as well. And autistic is the nicest one of the things that I ever got called. So to me, a diagnosis does so many things, whether you're a child or an adult. Firstly, it helps you understand yourself. It helps you realise that there's a reason for the things that are different about you, the things that you find challenging. Helps you realise that it's not that you're failing or you're damaged or you're broken, but that you're different and that it's okay to be different. It helps you access supports that you need, because we have a system that requires you often to have that diagnosis. It helps you really learn about yourself, because once you've got that diagnosis, you can go and you can read and you can explore. It helps you find your community, your tribe. I mean, for me, one of the most powerful things was getting my diagnosis, going onto, not that I'm a huge fan of social media because it can be a really horrible environment, but one of the most empowering things for me was going into some of those online groups and finding that people would say, hey, has anybody ever done this weird thing? And I'd think, nobody's going to respond to that because I'm the only person in the whole world who's ever done that weird thing. And then within 15 minutes, 1,000 people had said, me too. And you think, these are my people. So to me, and for children, it's the same. I look at some of the organisations I know that work with groups of children. You've only got to look at an organisation like the Yellow Ladybugs and the little girls who join that group, and suddenly I'm not the freaky kid at my school who doesn't fit in. Here's these other people. I'm one of these people. So to me, I can't see a situation where a diagnosis is harmful. Unfortunately, we live in a world where sometimes disclosure can be a problem. So sharing that diagnosis with other people. We still live in a world where there is stigma, there is discrimination. So there may be times where you may want to think carefully about, do I disclose that diagnosis to an employer, to other people for whatever reason, but I can't see a situation in which not knowing why you are different and why you are perfectly fine exactly the way you are could ever be a bad thing to know.
Great, thank you. Yeah, you can see why the book is so helpful. Here's one that we discussed a little bit before. How do you approach the comment when someone says, "Oh, everybody's a little bit autistic"? One of you asked this.
That is something that you hear all the time, and I do find that really frustrating. I find it frustrating for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because it really minimises the actual challenges that we do experience as autistic people, because it is, I mean, for one thing, it is nonsense. Everybody is not a little bit autistic. But to say that, it comes from a place of not really understanding what it's like to be autistic. It's taking a very superficial, external aspect of it. So when people say that, they're looking at the stereotype. So they're looking at the very visual presence that they see. So the stereotype that we have, that an autistic person is a person who's socially awkward, probably a little bit nerdy. And so I hear that used so often, and particularly used as an insult. So, it's a way of kind of dismissing people who are a little bit socially awkward. They're not a little bit autistic, because there's so much more to being an autistic person, because there's all that stuff that happens inside. There's the sensory stuff, there's all of those other aspects that are part of being autistic. It's like saying, oh, that person's, a really terrible dancer, so they're a little bit paraplegic. You would not say that. You would say that is, that is grossly offensive, isn't it? Like, I can hear embarrassed laughter in the room, because that is a grossly offensive thing to say and not something you would say. But it's the same type of offensive thing, and people say it all the time.
I'm going to share, the first question that I asked Sandra was, where did you get the shoes? What did you keep in those shoes? Because they are awesome. And I know Charlie wants to know, because we share a love of shoes. So I'm just going to get a little bit trivial for a while and ask you, what do you keep in those little pouches in your shoes?
Okay.
They are so cute. If you can't see them up the back.
Okay. I have a lipstick in this one. I don't usually wear makeup because I don't like things on my skin, but I do when people point cameras at me, I wear lipstick. And a hand sanitizer in that one.
Oh, then they want to know where you got them from.
Oh, look, this is going to get really embarrassing, isn't it? Because you're going to expect me to say that I got them from some glamorous boutique or something, aren't you? I got them on Facebook Marketplace for $20.
I think it's possibly the most important question, but they've all been great answers so far. You've talked a little bit about masking and unmasking, and because I've read your book and I've got a bit of an idea about that. Could you talk a little bit about what is this experience of masking is it a compensation that you adopt, that you did spontaneously adopt? And the question that comes from the audience is, can you talk about this experience of being masked versus unmasked in your life, and the differences you notice when you unmask?
Okay. So I wouldn't say masking is spontaneous. I'd say it's something that you learn to do over a long period of time, and we learn to do it because we learn over time that the way we are naturally is not acceptable to other people. So it starts when we're small children, and people constantly point out to us that certain things we do are not normal. They either make other people feel uncomfortable or they make us look weird. So it will be things like, don't make that noise, it makes you sound funny. Don't flap your hands, people will look at you. You don't move that way, don't speak that way. Make eye contact with people when you're talking to them, because that's polite. So it's all of those things that we're told over and over to do. Move this way, don't move that way, speak this way, don't speak that way. Answer someone when they speak to you, this is the right answer to that question. Even things like, just normal conversation. How are you? You don't actually want me to answer that. See, I learned that. I still do it. Sometimes when I'm not thinking, someone will say, "How are you?" And I say, "Well, I've actually got a horrible sore throat, and I really don't want to be here today because I've got this problem with my arm." And then you think, "Oh, I wasn't supposed to say that. I was supposed to say, fine, thank you." So you learn it over time, but the problem is you learn it so well that you're not really aware that you're doing it. It becomes just so, and that's why I'm saying it's not spontaneous. You know that you get home at the end of the day and that you are absolutely exhausted. You know, you become aware that there's certain ways that you act when other people aren't around that are different. So I know, for me, even pre-diagnosis, when there was no one in the house, I would move differently and make noises and things. But I was still, even in front of my husband, I would stop because I'd think, oh, he's going to think I'm weird and he's going to, suddenly not want to be married to me anymore. I think, oh my God, I married a crazy woman. But you learn, those things are so drummed into you. But can you imagine what it's like if you have to spend your entire time consciously not moving in ways that, so remembering all the time to keep your hands still and to make eye contact with people, and you have to smile and you have to answer these questions in those ways, and don't move your feet, don't move your hands. So it is really, really exhausting. And then when you start to realise that, hey, it's actually not right that I do all these things to make everyone else comfortable and I feel insanely uncomfortable all the time, and you start to let go of some of that, and at least in front of some people that you feel safe around, you start to be more yourself and stop hiding all those things. You start to actually feel happier and calmer and more comfortable with yourself. And that's when you think, hey, why don't we leave all these autistic kids alone and let them just be themselves, and they could actually grow up happy, healthy human beings.
I'm kind of tempted to stop there, but there's just one more, if you don't mind, because I'm trying to milk this because it's so fantastic to have your insights. For people who are neurotypical in the audience and they're going to go to work tomorrow, and one of their work colleagues says, "Look, I am autistic and South Australian." So what would you say to that person to how to open a conversation about it? What would you be thinking would be the best way for them to open that conversation?
Two things. Firstly, don't say, "Oh, no, you're not." "Oh, I don't think so," which is what lots of people say, because they think they're being nice, or "I never would have guessed," or "No, you can't be, you must." And people think they're being nice. What they're actually saying is, "I am totally denying your identity for you here." So don't do that. Definitely don't do that. The best thing you can do is say, "Oh, are you? Is there anything I can do to support you? What would you like me to know about autism? What would you like? Is there things that I could do to make you more comfortable?" Don't tell them that you know everything about autism because you've got an autistic boy who lives next door, or you watched Atypical once, or one of those other shows that's even worse. Don't say that. I would just say, "Oh, I didn't know that. Thanks for sharing. Is there anything that you want me to know, or anything I can do to support you?" That's what people need. Just to know that you accept them the way that they are, and that you're happy to do what you can to support them. And that you're keen to actually know what it is that they need.
So thank you for sharing the insights. I feel like we've all been the beneficiary. We're all students learning from Professor. Very much so. It's been amazing to have this conversation. I hope that I've adequately covered the questions from the audience. Thank you so much for turning out. This is an amazing turnout for you, Sandra. I hope that you appreciate what a great turnout this is. So can we please express our